I am on holiday right now and I noticed how much I'm body checking all the time, especially when you're in a bikini and you're not used to being in a bikini, which, like me, I don't think I've owned a bikini honestly ever. I think even as a kid I wore like a tankini, you know, a tank top, or even just a rash vest to cover myself up. I'm now exhausting myself by checking in every little reflection or mirror what I look like and if I look okay and if I look acceptable. And yeah, it got me thinking about how much I'm lacking presence in my life because I'm so worried about being perceived. So I thought it'd be really interesting to learn about who am I trying to impress and what's the reason. So that's when I started basically learning a lot more about the male gaze and what that is and where it comes from. The male gaze is, I think, best described as a chronic habit of self-analysing and observing yourself and worrying about how you're being perceived. You're probably like really familiar with the concept if you go on TikTok or on Instagram or any kind of social media outlet that talks about dressing for the feminine gaze versus dressing for the male gaze. That's the most obvious example of where you would have seen it, but I think this even extends to concepts like understanding boy pretty and girl pretty. It was first up the male gaze from Laura Mulvey, so she's a film theorist, and she had this paper called Visual Pleasure and Narrative Cinema, and in that she basically talked about the fact that modern cinema at the time, this was in 1975, that modern cinema at the time was structured around the male viewer and built for the male viewer, which basically meant that you saw how women were being observed through the male lens. And when that's everything that you digest, you then ultimately end up using that same lens and inflicting it on yourself. Basically, in other words, you start objectifying yourself in the way that the male gaze might. This is actually something that's called self-objectification. So you can objectify yourself from the TV that you watch, TikToks, any ads. Growing up in the UK in the early 2000s, this was unavoidable.
The biggest concern with Cassie for me was the size of her hips. I just want to measure your thighs just to see where we're at.
I hate to say it, they had to do a lot of body work on you and retouch. Stop! If you're sporting a gut, then you turn to the side and disguise it.
These girls have got backstage passes to Porkyville. These fatties haven't seen their feet for years. I'm about to meet a family of Essex fatties. I'm about to meet a right pair of podgy parents. I used to be a fatty myself.
You know Natalie, who works here?
The chubby girl?
Ooh, big corner chubby.
I think there's a pretty sizable ass there, yes sir. Huge size.
Sometimes you can really feel like you've overdone it. What we could do with is a fresh start to the year.
And yet Jennifer Lawrence tells Elle magazine, in Hollywood, I'm obese. I'm considered a fat actress.
It's not just the societal mechanisms, but also like a personal, developmental or family experience. So you might have grown up in an environment where you got repeated comments about your experience, and it doesn't even matter if they were positive or negative comments. Just the act of commenting on your appearance makes you very aware that your appearance is being monitored in the first place, and again, to some extent, make you start thinking about whether that's a value that's really important to others and therefore a value that I should internalize within myself. As I was researching this video, I literally couldn't think of a single safe space in my life where I haven't been constantly evaluating myself. Most of Western culture socializes women to adopt a third-person perspective. A good way to imagine this is like you're in a video game and you're switching between first and third person, but you're basically not able to ever forget the idea that you are being perceived, and that controls how you're acting or the way that you look, and ultimately the way that you present in society. Suddenly waking up in your own body and realizing that you're being perceived, and you're like, ooh, what do I do? How do I act? You're just like hyper aware of yourself all the time. Related, I feel like it's interesting now how I'm almost stopping myself because I'm noticing that, or worried that I'm being perceived, rather than necessarily just going with the flow. I am, to be fair, recording this in public, so I guess that's quite difficult to do when you're someone that really struggles with constantly feeling perceived and aware, and it's not something you're confident in. But anyway, I think this presence of the male gaze in my life takes away from being in the moment. Problem is also, like most things, they compound. Every time you monitor yourself, you basically reinforce the behaviour over and over again. That's what we would call an anxiety reinforcement loop, which is basically like, if I was checking to be able to handle uncertainty, this would just make me feel like I needed to do the checking in order to feel more certain. But again, you can't be certain about anything, right? This actually becomes so habitual that you can't even notice that you're doing it. In therapy, you often talk about not being able to understand that you've been triggered. It's the same thing. I've never been so unaware of how much I was checking myself on the daily. People also don't talk about, if you are constantly judging yourself all the time, you constantly start to be judging, critical of others. I'm kind of embarrassed to say, but this is definitely something I've noticed a bit more in my own life in my late 20s, that I start assessing other people with this really aggressive lens because I'm really self-critical internally of myself, and I'm constantly observing myself and constantly changing how I behave. In my own life, I've definitely tried to make myself more palatable for the room, and that's exhausting. Like, that's actually so exhausting. It's draining my brain so much every day to know and be self-aware. When you're in deep focus, it can take you as long as 23 minutes to return to that focus once you've been distracted. Now, imagine that you are distracting yourself every single time you're suddenly aware that you're being perceived. It's an astronomical amount of time that you are losing to the male gaze. Let's say, we'll take the middle ground, okay, because it's probably not going to be 23 minutes and you're not always in deep focus. But let's say it takes you 5 seconds to be distracted and then about 2 minutes to come back to what you were doing, and you recenter yourself after you've been decentered by being perceived or thinking that you need to do something in the male gaze way. 2 minutes and 5 seconds, if I did that every day, 10 times a day, for 10 years, I'm losing almost a month of my time just being distracted and decentering myself because of the male gaze. Like, it's insane amount. Honestly, I think 10 is conservative. 100% I'm doing this way more than 10 times a day, at least in my own life. That's just of all your hours over 10 years. But if it was all of your productive potential working hours, so like let's say 8 hours a day, you could be spending around 7% of your day getting distracted and self-objectifying. That's not even the worst of it, because research suggests that out of 8 working hours, you're actually only going to produce like 1 hour of productive work. So anywhere from 1 in 15 or 1 in 2 of your best thinking time could be taken thinking about the male gaze and getting distracted and worrying. Do I look the way that I'm supposed to look in accordance with how I'm supposed to look for the male gaze? Which is an insane amount of time. With that in mind, I want to put together good tactics to help you notice this and to stop yourself wasting so much of your life doing this. The first one for me is you need to know what you're doing before you can tackle it, and that's basically the act of noticing the habit. And I know this is going to be really hard because ultimately you don't know what you don't know. Let's say, ask yourself, what are ways that I can notice this more? So that might be practicing mindfulness and doing meditation. If you don't already journal or record yourself working through your thoughts, I think it would be a good exercise to understand how much or how little that your brain is stressed or worried or stopping yourself from being just because you're being perceived. I think also taking stock of what are the triggers or the places with which you are enacting the habit most. So being around appearance-focused people, also returning back home, I know for me it can be a really difficult one because a lot of people have learnt this habit and this behaviour, particularly from their maternal figure in their lives. Really anywhere where there's a group of men is a big one for me. I don't like the presence of men. Also internal and emotional triggers. So I notice in myself if I haven't eaten or slept very well. So notice when you're doing it. Once you've noticed yourself doing it, you can then rename and reevaluate how you view the process. So the best thing to do is to direct your attention to physical sensations. I think a common one that people often suggest is the 5 things you can touch, 5 things you can smell. I think it's like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, but it's just noticing, 5 things you can touch, 4 things you can smell, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can see, whatever it might be, in whatever kind of order. And then the last thing is to remind yourself of the cost of this loss of attention. To phrase it is to potentially just say, this distraction is taking up space I could be using for X. So this distraction is taking up space that I could be using for new work. You can even start quantifying how much you're distracting yourself, and that should hopefully be a motivator to stop you from distracting yourself more, or at least to notice the habit when it happens. My next tip is to try more physical hobbies, and not just trying physical hobbies but trying group hobbies, and particularly with female friends. Build long-term platonic friendships with women that don't center around appearances, okay? So it's really important to reward yourself and congratulate yourself on a physical element of your body rather than necessarily just the appearance of your body. While it's important to spend time with good female friends, it's just as important to spend time alone with yourself. If you spend time alone with yourself, you can really help yourself develop an understanding of What did you like? What did you not like? Making the voice in your head a little bit louder that says, I want to do this today. I want to go try this new hobby or do this new creative thing. And the more that you do that also, you build a skill and confidence in practicing a hobby that again reinforces the confidence to not, I guess, to see your value as more than just your appearance. The next one is therapy, and I know this isn't going to be for everyone, mainly because it's just very expensive, but I'd really encourage people to have a look at acceptance and commitment therapy. And this is a type of therapy that looks at values. So it looks at what are the values that are most important to you in your life and how can you shift your behavior in order to make sure that they are in your life a lot more. So for example, you literally just look at a list of values, and I'll put some up on the screen, and you keep reading them through, and you keep over time in this process shifting, okay, this one calls to me, this one doesn't call to me, and you'll eventually have maybe like 3 or 4 that you can focus on for the year that you can look to be shaping your life more around, and that gives you a direction in your life that isn't around the male observer or other people really. The thing that I found really important at one point in my life was reciprocity. I really wanted reciprocal friendships, and I made a real effort to make sure that I wasn't shifting my time once I understood that to allow for people that wasted my time. And this is just good in general through the rest of your life, but try to increase your exposure to risk by going low groom on an occasion where it's low stakes. So that could be anything from just deciding not to wear mascara for a singular day, whatever it might be. Just pick one small thing about your makeup routine, let's say, and just reduce that lightly and see how you feel. Notice how difficult it is, but notice by the end of the day that you're probably going to feel a lot better, and the next day if you tried it again that it wouldn't feel anywhere near as difficult. I've talked a lot about how media and TV and the ads that we ingest, particularly for me in the early 2000s, really impacted this for me. So with that in mind, another good hack is that you should not be ingesting media that is heavily male made or heavily male observer driven. Make your algorithm bubble a little bit more happy, kind, positive, body positive, whatever it might be that you're struggling with. Help yourself so that you can close the loop and you're not just seeing all this comparison content. Another good one is to invest in yourself by doing a hobby or a skill or creative or musical outlet. So learning the piano, learning to draw. All of these hobbies also happen to be really good at mindfulness and bringing yourself into the present. The main thing is that you should be giving yourself skills that develop your confidence, that don't rely on the way that you look or your body. There's a really good quote by Fernando Rozoa which basically says, "Man shouldn't be able to see his own face. There's nothing more sinister. Nature gave him the gift of not being able to see it and of not being able to stare into his own eyes. Only in the water of rivers and ponds could he look at his face, and the very posture he had to assume was symbolic." And I really like his quote on this because it reminds us just how much it isn't natural for us to be looking at our face every single day. There are so many contexts in your life where you should not be seeing yourself, and the Zoom window is one of them, okay? Close it, minimize it, block it with like a post-it note, whatever you need to do in order to not be able to see yourself in contexts where you don't need to see it. Not only is it important to make sure that you have a really healthy group of female friends around you, it's important to make sure that you engage in learning on some more feminist principles in your life. There's lots of things that we can give ourselves a lot of shit for as women that actually, like, it's very natural that you would do it in the world that we grew up in and the political space that we're in. So that could be anything from commenting on female or feminist posts, going to a rally, reading a little bit more on feminist literature, or even just having feminist icons be something that you really look up to in your life. This is slightly related to the media and healthy algorithm point, but one thing you should make sure that you're doing is that you're not passively ingesting content. You should try to be a bit more active in the content that you do watch. So that can be anything from taking notes as you watch it, or even just pausing and debating a certain thing that you're watching with your friend or your partner, let's say. I think it helps you be more aware critically of your thinking and how you feel about something, rather than just sort of like letting it go over you in the moment. And it allows you to develop your own thoughts and your own stance and your own perspective on things, which is really important to help you develop a sense of self that isn't related to how you think you're supposed to be acting. I really just suggest getting out of short form media for as long as possible. It just doesn't give you enough time to develop any thinking in any way about the videos that you're seeing. My final point is have patience. There's probably not going to be a linear experience for you. And growth never is. There's a lots of ups and downs and swings and roundabouts, but I do think that progress can be exponential. So once you start kind of getting moving and accelerating, it's only up from here. It's going to be hard, guys. You've been programmed to be like this for the whole of your life. You'll probably continue to be reprogrammed as you're moving through your life. So that's why all of these tips are really centered around trying to like block out all of the male gaze noise and focus only on your own feelings, your own opinion, your own direction of your own life. You will end up living a more authentic life, and that's what living is for. If you are like me and you're watching this video and you're thinking like, shit, is it really that much time? What I've done is I've made a little calculator, and you can go to the link in the description, or you can click this one here. You can figure out how much time you're potentially wasting of your life to centering yourself around the male gaze, and then hopefully that will be enough to kick yourselves up the butt.